but a fly flew into my mouth. Hey, another day, another test. A 125 because for now I only have a Category B driver's license. But it's a great opportunity to test out these small machines, which often introduce people to this world of motorcycles. Today we're putting the Yamaha NMAX 125 TechMax version to the test. As usual, we'll start with the looks, and here I think Yamaha has done a really great job combining this aggressive look with more rounded shapes. It has a lot of sharp lines, but they're slightly curved at the edges, and it looks really cool. The front headlight looks intense and blends beautifully with the front fairing. I really like it. And then there's the windshield, which doesn't seem particularly large. It's more like an aesthetic element, but it actually does quite a lot, but more on that later. The seat is also really nice and modern with those patterns, and it's bright. The yellow stitching, which is also a nice little touch, adds a bit of character and is another detail that further enhances the look of this scooter. In my opinion, it's the rear lights, which are black when they're off and look really cool. This matches perfectly with the matte paint and the dark finish of the scooter. Looking at the shape of this scooter, but not from an aesthetic point of view, rather a practical one, it's about ergonomics. In my case, it doesn't really impress. I'm 1.84 meters tall, and that meant I couldn't really position my legs in any way except for this one. At the front, there's a nice wide footrest. I thought I'd use it, but because of how the handlebars and seat are positioned, it wasn't very comfortable, and I also didn't keep my feet down because the footrests are slightly slanted downward. So in reality, I was riding in this position the whole time, but to my surprise, it didn't become uncomfortable. After a longer ride, well, I was forced to ride in just one position, which didn't make it any easier for me to get comfortable. The fact is, the handlebars themselves may not be particularly narrow, but they're quite closed in. For a scooter, that is. Usually, scooters have very open handlebars, which I personally prefer. The handlebars are also set quite low, and as for the seat, while you can move back, it rises up here. And when you sit at the back, it kind of pushes you down, so once again, you're basically forced to ride in just one way. It's enclosed, it looks cool and modern. And a big advantage is that you can control all the functions on the screen without taking your hands off the handlebars. Everything is done just with your thumbs. As for the interface itself, it wasn't all that intuitive because some buttons have different functions depending on which menu you're in, but it's fairly easy to figure out. And of course, if someone uses this every day, they'll have no trouble getting the hang of it. There was something that bothered me a little. It's the ignition knob. It's a bit plasticky, kind of loose, just like the seat and fuel cap buttons. On the other hand, a big plus is that although it's a small thing, they don't make any noise, which I find really annoying. When you turn the ignition, with every slightest movement or press, you get a loud beep, and here that wasn't the case, so I have to give Yamaha credit for that. However, it does beep in one very useful moment. So if you leave it with the ignition on, of course, the key is wireless, and you walk away from the scooter, it will start emitting a repetitive beeping sound to notify you. That simply means the scooter is still turned on. An important feature of this TechMax version, as the name suggests, is that it comes equipped with a wide range of different technologies, and not just the more basic ones like ABS or traction control. We also have all of its digital features, its capabilities, so to speak. You can easily switch the display between the tachometer and other data, but there's also navigation, which has a really cool feature. You don't have to take out your phone to set navigation to your home or work. For testing, I set a random address in the city center, and the navigation handled it quite well. It takes a moment for it to find the route, but as you can see, not very long. It's definitely simpler than setting it up from your phone. However, if you want to go somewhere other than previously saved places like home or work, unfortunately, you'll have to open your phone. And as for how the apps themselves work, well, they don't look particularly great. They're not very pretty. You need two apps for this, Yamaha MiRide and Garmin Street. The actual operation is okay, but honestly, connecting and configuring everything was really unpleasant for me. It took about 15 or 20 minutes, which doesn't sound like a particularly long time, but it was honestly very frustrating. Really frustrating. 15 minutes. But in the end, it was really worth it. And of course, we only have to go through the configuration process once, although one shortcoming is that we first have to launch the app on the phone. Garmin Street Cross, so that navigation works for us. It can run in the background and then we can close it, but it does have to stay open in the background the whole time. Additionally, there are extra features like being able to control music, for example. It works seamlessly exactly as you'd expect. When you press the play button, it either pauses or starts playing. And with the down arrows, you can lower the volume, and with the up arrows, you can turn it up. It's very intuitive, and we can do it without any trouble. While driving, although you do have to click through the menu, however, when switching between these modes, like navigation, which can be set as the priority screen, is always right under your thumb. And it only takes 2 or 3 clicks. That's all it takes to get back to the maps. The NMAX 125 really looks great and has those cool features that make it more attractive. However, the most important thing for me, which is the handling, didn't quite meet my expectations. It's not that it was terrible, but honestly, it wasn't really good in any aspect except maybe when riding with a slight lean. But let's start with the brakes. They did their job. They stopped the scooter strongly enough, but the only problem was that with light braking, there was very little feel for both the rear and front brakes. On top of that, the distance between them is different, at least for me. Both positions suited me, but there is no adjustment here, so we're kind of forced to use the factory settings. However, the braking power itself was sufficient. Of course, this is a 125cc scooter. We're not reaching any high speeds, and the weight of 132 kg doesn't mean we need any amazing shield. But what was it that bothered me about this? As far as the frame is concerned, it was pretty cool, but the suspension setup didn't suit me at all. It was quite stiff, i.e. when passing over some minor irregularities such as small holes, patches or tram tracks, it didn't handle particularly well. You could clearly feel those vibrations, and when we were riding at higher speeds, they were even more noticeable. Very noticeable. Going over bigger bumps didn't look much better either. The scooter didn't bottom out completely, but the suspension was still stiff, not very well cushioned, and I expected that on smooth asphalt, on some nice roads, this stiffer suspension, let's say, would work nicely, but I didn't really notice that in the end. It handled best at small lean angles and was very easy to switch from side to side there. And even at a fairly small lean angle, it started to turn really nicely and gave a lot of confidence while riding. It was very light above all, but as soon as we went into a slightly greater lean, it started to, I would say, sway a little, be not entirely stable, and didn't quite inspire a lot of confidence while riding. The only time it handled really well was when we were approaching a corner using both brakes, with moderately strong braking, which put a bit more weight on the front and caused the suspension to compress. And then as you enter the corner and release the brake, the scooter starts to handle well, but it's not a sports machine. It's not really designed for fast riding, let alone for diving deep into the apex while braking, so I think that's a bit of a limitation here. A slight oversight. The engine puts out a little over 12 horsepower, which is definitely sufficient for a scooter of this weight. As for acceleration from 0 to 50 or 70 kilometers per hour, well, there were obviously no issues here. We could take off from the lights nicely and dynamically. Above 70 kilometers per hour, the acceleration was still noticeable. And honestly, I expected it to drop off significantly after 90, but it still managed just fine. Of course, it didn't reach its top speed particularly quickly, but it did actually get there. It even exceeded it because according to the technical specifications, the maximum speed is 110 km per hour, but I managed to reach 120. However, I expect that with a bit stronger headwind, it could actually drop. And of course, the GPS speed was a few kilometers per hour lower. Unfortunately, I don't know exactly by how much. But you could comfortably drive it on expressways precisely because of that windshield. Even though it's not particularly large, it is actually quite upright. And at the top, it bends additionally. And it really works here when it comes to creating that bubble. Above us, it wasn't incredibly good. The wind still hit my helmet and ended roughly at the level of my neck, but with just an ordinary scarf, it didn't cause any problems, and all I had to do was lean forward slightly, and I felt that almost nothing was hitting my neck, nothing was hitting my chest. So if someone I suspect is under 1.8 meters tall, they could really travel comfortably on the highway. Additionally, the scooter remained stable even at such speeds. A small thing I'd like to point out is the mirrors, because they're positioned behind the brake fluid reservoirs, not next to or in front of them. This means they're quite close to us, so you really have to turn your head a lot to see them. And because they're so close to us, it's actually hard to adjust them at an angle where you can see both the lane next to you and what's happening directly behind you. On top of that, they're not perfectly flat themselves. I mean, they're slightly curved at the edges. And that causes each eye to see a slightly different image, creating a sort of mini cross-eye effect. At first, it really bothered me. I thought it would get worse over time, but somehow I got used to it. However, the visibility in the mirrors really wasn't good for these reasons. Now, let's move on to the main feature that matters in scooters, which is their practicality. In the front, we have asymmetrical compartments, which in my opinion are the best solution, because on one side, you can have something where you can easily reach in with your glove to grab something, let's say, for example, keys to open a gate or your phone to check navigation while you're stopped at a light, although here you don't really need that because it's already built in. And on the right side, we have a lockable glove compartment where you can store something you wouldn't want to fall out while riding. However, the highlight of the show, so to speak, the storage under the seat, is a bit disappointing. The only helmet I managed to fit in there was a non-modular one, and even then, it was a small non-modular helmet, and it didn't close properly at all. I really had to force the seat down, pressing with my whole weight until it slightly bent just to get it to close. Fortunately, the lid itself is a bit flexible, so it was possible to close it that way. I wouldn't feel comfortable sitting on it, knowing that all my weight would be pressing down on the helmet shell. Of course, when it comes to groceries or a small backpack, I can fit them in here without any problem, but the shape isn't exactly uniform either. So I think we'll mostly be able to toss in loose items that can adapt to the shape rather than anything rigid. Let's say, I don't know, a parcel locker box or something like that. Someone might say that you can easily solve this with a top case, and that someone would probably be me, because I always say that when it comes to top cases on scooters, they usually don't ruin the aesthetics. However, this one is really neat, small and dynamic. And I saw one on the street that had a top case installed, and I think it didn't look too good. Of course, if someone really cared about being able to store a helmet in there to be able to put things away, more items, well, then I would definitely install it here. The price of the Yamaha NMAX 125 in the TechMax version is 16,900 pilan. And let's say, who is this scooter actually for? I think it's for someone who really likes to zip around the city, moves very quickly from one place to another, and is constantly exploring new spots. So they use the built-in navigation, like these kinds of gadgets, enjoy a modern look, and aren't slowed down by luggage, and doesn't look back in the mirrors.